Hello, everybody, and welcome to the power rankings for the Sinnoh division. I'm Coltrane's, and I
Well,
am joining you with.
Bubbles, hey. Want to just start off with the opening regards?
Yeah, of course. All right. Of course, our open regards. This is just a little bit about how we went through and graded each team. I follow a pretty strict rubric with very little personal opinions. A little bit more weighted this season because my normal national decks rubric didn't quite fit into this meta, but ultimately what really matters is going to be how you play. These once again are opinions and Frubles if you want to add anything on top of this.
I went for pretty much an entirely subjective thing. There are things I was looking for, but there was never something that needed to be good or if you had would be bad. Again, these are just of looking at the teams themselves, nothing to do with the players. And it's up to the coach to make a team work. So
Yeah, so even if you place at 16th, right? I've seen people who place at 16th in power rankings before go all the way through the finals. I've seen some of them even take the home the championship. Don't take it as a slight. It's not, anything personal. It's just where we ended up ranking you, right?
if
So,
we rank you low, just prove us wrong. That's the best way to get back to this.
exactly. And you're in the Sinnoh division, right? You kind of have the most leeway to be able to do that.
Yeah, this
So
is a learning division. It's gonna be nice, fun.
our first team that we got here is Wholesome Shadows, Dancing Hearts, and you have them a little bit higher up. So I'll
Yes,
let you go ahead and start here.
okay. So first thing, you have some really powerful Pokemon. You got Landorus, Therian, you got Azor, Tyranitar, Regieleki, just some kind of just individually very strong Pokemon. I like the Sandrush on this, especially since that's your Terra Captain. You can do a lot of fun stuff with Lycanroc. I think where it really starts falling apart is that you just have a lot of weaknesses that end up stacking. And besides Lycanroc and Sand, I don't really see a lot of the synergy in this team.
And like looking through my notes here, specifically, uh, something this team is missing uh, a major aspect on my rubric is the fire water grass core is completely non-existent. It's going to make it very hard for you to break through water types, especially water ground types. Regieleki is going to be your only option to push through them reliably. And if they're also a ground type or if they Terra ground, it's going to be very difficult for you to push through. While I really like the Landorus, Scissor, Sylveon start, it just seems like the team went a couple different directions. Regieleki isn't really speed control as it sits at 200, well above anything else. It doesn't really put pressure on anything. So it's just a little bit awkward across the board. Um, you have options, but like not a solid definitive playstyle. It feels like this team is going to try to outlast, but doesn't quite outlast, and it's going to try to be offensive with certain mons like Lando, which is going to have to go Scarf a lot. It's just trying to do everything, but nothing quite solid enough.
I think no fire, water, or grass Pokemon is a big deal. I think the last big pro is it has great setters and it actually has solid removers because Scizor kept Defog.
Yeah, and it's
Uh,
unfortunate that Scissor lost Roost. Otherwise, I actually would like that sustain a lot more because it's just coming from Sylveon, right, with the wishes.
yeah, exactly. So I just don't really see the defensive synergy that well. I think offensively it works fine together. There's nothing outstanding to me besides maybe Sandrush or Lycanroc, which might surprise us.
Yeah, all right. Do you have anything else to say here, or should we just move on to the next team?
I think Gooch cute. That's about it.
Gudra is a key Pokemon. All right.
All right, so next we have Shadowtime's Shadowy Times.
Yes, get your team names into the team section. Go in there.
Right. Um. Anyway, I think the first thing that stood out to me is this team's utter lack of hazard setting. Have Berserker with Stealth Rock and Muck with T Spikes. That is not great at all. I think you have good removal thanks to Talonflame and Quaquaval, but it's just I don't really know how you rip stuff down. That said, I do think the win con of this team is that you can pivot into your big attackers. Pretty much everything either has some sort of pivot move or is said big attacker. So I think moving into Quaquaval, Spectrier, Ursaluna is how you're going to be able to put them in the right spot for this team.
Yeah, and there is some nice things about this team. Uh, I think it's very cute, the Talonflame Zapdos Spectrier combo. Even though your only T-Spike option is Muck, I think Spectrier with Hex, Flame Body, and Static is a very cute option to spread uh, status conditions around to power up Hex if you don't want to just be the Spec Shadow Ball, Specs Draining Kiss because it got access to that this generation set. You want to do more of like a Hex Willow type thing. I think that's very cute. I like that a lot. And quick, Quicklavel, is that how you pronounce that? Quicklavel?
I just call it Quaquaval.
Quackleval? I think is a very strong Pokemon, especially with a banded set being able to boost its speed through its stab. Very good. It's got like a bunch of generically good top end speed threats between Spectrier all the way down to Quacklavel. But then Ursalana kind of feels a little bit awkward here. It's a strong Pokemon, right? But I just don't necessarily see its point, like why it's fitting in, other than just being a big statted Pokemon that you're able to pick up for a lot of points. And relying solely on Berserker for rocks definitely hurts this team a lot. Uh, for speed
Ah,
tiers, I also took some points from it. Uh, and then specifically, the Fairy Dragon Steel Core is missing a Dragon and a Steel on this team, which took points away on my rubric as
missing a
well.
dragon and a fairy. We have the steel,
Oh,
not
I meant
multiple.
Fairy, excuse me.
But yeah, I would say the Ursaluna is cool. I think it has a fair amount of synergy with Spectre just because it's normal type that can hit things that most can't. But the big problem is, yeah, big speed gap between Aquaval and Gothorita, and Ursaluna is a ground type without hazards. I feel like if you're running a ground type that doesn't get hazards, you want something really important. And I think Ursaluna is a good Pokemon individually. It just doesn't work necessarily in the cohesion of the team. So I do like, of course, like you mentioned, the status spreading with Spectrier. But other than that, I'm not really sure what to make of the how this team works together. It's just a bunch of individually strong Pokemon.
Yeah, which I feel like is good enough to get wins for sure. It's just missing a little bit of cohesion.
That said, I'm very intrigued on what Gothorita can do as a trapper, especially since it's your Terra Captain. That you can basically make it tap whatever you want, having a specific type for it. So I think that could be interesting. That's also really high skill ceiling. I think you really need to like exceptionally well if you're going to have a Terra Gothorita, but I think it can work.
Yeah, so unless there's anything else you have, I think we're gonna move on to the next team here. All right, and then we have the Corviknight Riders here. This is a team I actually quite liked as the draft was going on, starting with. I thought that Xianpao, Corviknight, and Gengar was a very interesting, strong core to start with. And this team has a lot of good things going for it. You have really good removing options with Toedscruel and Corviknight, but the main issue that I have with this team is outside of like the Chimpao Gengar offensive core. Toxapex lost access to Knockoff and Scald, making it kind of a do-nothing Pokemon. Toedscruel's a little bit awkward, and all of your threats right up until Salamence seem very situational to me. If you run into a team that is going to start putting a lot of pressure specifically on like ghost attacks coming into you or uh, different kind of offensive pressures that Corviknight can't handle and Toxapex doesn't necessarily want to be handling now that it's in its like nerfed form, you might struggle to keep going because your defensive types, rock, flying, ghost, you're a little bit open to.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. I think the fact that your main defensive core gets beaten by electric, and you do have two electric immunities, but they can be kind of destroyed on the switch with a single read. That's a little dangerous. I feel like there's a really good offensive core here, and separately there's a really good defensive core, but I don't think the offensive core and the defensive core interact well.
Right? Like it doesn't combine for a good mid-rangey team. It just kind of clashes, is how I'm feeling.
Yeah, exactly. No stealth rock is a big deal, and also one spike setter. So you have three options for toxic spikes, which is but that's the most situational hazard, and your only spike setter is Toad Scroll, which always goes last. So basically have no guaranteed hazard setting, which is a bit of an issue, especially in such like a hazard focused meta.
Yeah, and another thing that's just a little bit awkward is you're doubling up on speed tiers. Specifically at this 100 speed tier, you have both Troll Crew and Salamence, then it drops 25 points, kind of opening up some gaps for some adamant modest types potentially, right around that like 95 zone, which a lot of mons fall into. And then you double up on the 75 speed tier as well, and then doubling up at 65. Just a little bit awkward as you start to go down past your 110 right off Gengar. So Wallace team does have like a good kind of like presence and like in both of its defensive and offensive ways. Jam Powell will run away with games, right? It's literally Mega Weavile, and then you have Gengar, which is good. You know, it's just I feel like it's gonna run into some bad matchups that will just feel really bad to play.
I think each of the individual defensive Pokemon can be countered with relative ease. Toxapex, you just set up a substitute. Toadscruel, you run safety goggles, and overnight, you just have something that's not weak to Brave Bird or Body Press. Will be fine on the defensive. And they're a little passive, so they can't really threaten you if you bring pretty simple counter to them.
Yeah,
I,
losing Scald really hurts Toxapex, and not being able to take off an item means it's just coming in to do nothing. If there was like another Regenerator Mon, then I could like it a lot more.
I will say as a final note, I really like these Terra Captains. Uh, I think Elinx having an Omni boost into Stab Rock Slide, Stab Poison, Jab, Iron Head, Mega Horn can really do a lot with it. I feel like a lot of what Phalanx lacking is just something other than being a boring old fighting type. So that can help. Jolteon, I feel like it can benefit a lot from becoming a ghost type or uh, yeah, a ghost type mainly, or a normal type for just hyper voice.
If Jolteon could use Terra Blast while being a Terra Captain, if that wasn't banned, I think it would be an incredible Terra Captain. But unfortunately, that's the rule set we fall into.
It'd be a shame if someone brought Terra Blast Jolteon to a game. Anyway,
Yeah, that would be a shame. All right. Without getting into that, I think we good to move on to the next team because I don't want to really rip at this team too much more. Like I said, I still kind of like this team. It's just there's some holes.
all right. So, Threshly's team, the West, one of the biggest gaps we have. Do you want to take this, Cole James?
Yeah. So this team in particular, I like what it's going for. I like teams that typically have an identity, a game plan, try to do one thing, two things well, uh, and my most successful teams personally have been enough uh, of a hammer makes everything a nail tends to work quite well in Pokemon. So when I take a look at this team, it got a lot of points for me in the cohesion and intangibles. Esperanza and Grimmsnarl, Cyclozar to like get them safely in after Grimmsnarl sets up a dual screen. Everything here is looking to set up. Esperanza with speed boost. You have Frostmoth, you have SD, even on Rillaboom. Everything has like a setup option. Kill Watchful is here to give you Tailwind. So I just like what this team has going on in general quite a bit. Um, it has some defensive holes, which definitely keeps it back. Of course, like if you ever lose the momentum with this team, I feel like you're losing the game. The second you start uh, running into a team that really does well at clearing your boosts, I don't think anyone drafted Murkrow, but if someone did have like the Haze Prankster Murkrow, would be a dream into this team. Um, but since I like teams that have that kind of presence, and this team has that, and I can see this team just running away into certain matchups, I rate it a little bit higher.
Yeah, I think this team is just it's hard hyper offense, which is as much as people like to call hyper offense brain dead, it's a very difficult play style because a single
Especially in
wrong,
draft.
especially in draft, a single wrong move can lose you the game, and a single right move can win you the game. I think that the fact that you are forced into hyper offense instead of just having hyper offense options is the biggest drawback. You'll have a lot a lot of defensive holes. You're weak to ice, flying, dark, fairy, rock, and even normal and bug. So people can spam U-turn or double edges, which often not very spammable. I like a lot of these setup options, but not too many of them set up with speed. Obviously, Espasa has the speed boost, but Rillaboom lost Grassy Glide, and Frostmoth is not exactly a fast quiver dancer. So you have the power behind the setup. You don't exactly have the speed for it.
And like, there's a couple like niche things that you could go for. Like, technically, you have a regen core between Clef and Cyclizar, um, but your all of your like type charts are missing something, right? The only type chart that you've completed, like the type cores, right, is the fire, water, grass, and your water is Shellos. Otherwise, your fairy dragon steel is missing a steel. Uh, your fighting psychic dark is missing a fighting. So you have none of your type cores really complete unless you're counting Shellos as a water type. It's definitely got holes, but I think the holes are fine as long as you know what you're going into. But you are just going to have to play absolutely perfectly, otherwise you will lose.
I think the one big thing is this hyper offense team doesn't really have a good hazard setter. You do have three rock setters, but two of them are not fully evolved. So I think that might be the thing. But once again, this is hyper offense. You have screens, you have shed tail, and you have a bunch of setup sweepers. So if you can make the correct plays early, you can just snowball for a win. I feel like this is a very 6-0 get 6-0'd team kind of thing.
100%. I don't think we really need to expound on any further. You know what you're trying to do. Your opponent will know what you're trying to do, and it really is just going to depend on who has. I guess maybe it's a little matchup fishy. So let's go ahead and move on here. All
All
right,
right.
we got the Toronto Twinkletones, and you have them rated higher here, so I'll let you start off.
We have Wondermelons next.
Oh, Wonderbones, did I skip one? I did skip one, my bad. And I actually have this one rated higher up here. So this team is a bit weird to me. Uh, it has a lot going on, just kind of everywhere. Your removal options aren't really that great, even though it shows on our image here that like uh, Mew still has defog, it doesn't, right? So your removal option is like Noivern, and Mew lost a lot of its defensive moves, a lot of its utility this generation. So you have like this really strong first pick with Iron Valiant, and a lot of like techie mons like Hatterene with Magic Bounce, not really committing to a Trick Room core. And you have Unaware Clodsire, which really is good on its own because there'll be a lot of setup options running around and this heavy like hazard setting offensive meta, and it all just kind of just doesn't squeezed together in the best way, and your speed tiers are a little bit awkward here and there, having big jumps from like 85 to 65 and then 65 to 29. It's just got a couple holes in it, but it's not necessarily bad. I could see this team winning a fair bit of the time because it just has some generic power running around. I don't know, how do you feel?
Yeah, I would say I think the team is definitely going to need to rely on the hazard setting. They have four spikers because Samurai technically counts as a spiker with its new move, and Toxic Spikes and Stealth Rock. And I think they might just want to run like Magic Bounce and Boot Spam a lot of the time, kind of put around hazards. They have really good defensive Pokemon individually, but they still ended up with a bunch of type weaknesses like Ice, Poison, Flying, and Fairy.
All
Not
of
really.
which is something Steel would resist, which you don't have.
Yes. Um. So I feel like if you have the right switches and get Iron Valiant in at the right time, Iron Valiant is such an amazing Pokemon. I think if you get him in on the right times, and if you use the Mew creatively, I think you can get wins that way. But otherwise, kind of just feels like what a bulky team that doesn't resist enough to work.
Like I said, I think this team would benefit greatly from a Steel type, right? I don't know which ones are left at this point. Steel was one of those types in the draft that was heavily contested. Uh, Steel, Ground, and Fairy, I felt, are very low in this draft pool. So I don't know if there's any good ones left lying around. But if there was like a good, I don't know if you'd want necessarily offensive, but like kind of offensive hazard removal Steel type, I feel like that would set perfectly onto this team.
Yeah, exactly. Um, I think Moltres is a very good Terra captain just because, at least in Gen 8, I know how easily it swept a ton of teams. And if you're able to just swap its weaknesses on the fly, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, get that like weakness policy berserk going off.
Exactly.
Yeah, like I said, it has some decent setup options. It's just kind of middle of the roady, just everywhere. I
Well,
feel like.
that's why we have it at 12. Right.
And now we have the Toronto Twinkletones. So I'll let you start with this one.
Yes, the Toronto Twinkletones, this is the best hazard setting team, bar none. You have Glamora, the best hazard setter ever created, because every time you hit it, you get T spikes. You have Ting Lu, who honestly might be the second best hazard setter in the game, just because you can't kill it ever. It has spikes and stealth rock. And then you also have stealth rock from Copperajah. So you are able to get hazards every single time. And you are a good amount of pivots to take advantage of that. Dracloak, Tornadus, Rotom. Slowbro doesn't have a pivot move, but since it's regen, it gets to pivot around a lot better. So I really like that. Um,
Yeah,
but I think that
that regen core is nice, right? But it's like sometimes you want to be running the quick draw. It's got some interesting options to run around with, right? Yeah, I feel like Tornadus isn't that good of a Pokemon anymore without access to knockoff, defog. It still does its job. It's just a little less
I
valuable.
think people are still underestimating the nasty plot set, especially because it got a slightly more accurate line type move this gen. So that could be really helpful. Oh, honestly, your special setup is not the issue here. That you don't have much for physical setup. You have bulk up. Oh, Swords Dance Urshifu. I forgot it got Swords Dance. That's it.
Yeah, I mean, you're also missing some core stuff like no fire type for your Firewar Grass specifically. Um, you're also missing a type in your Fairy Dragon Steel, right? No fairy type once again. and it's just got like a couple different options in there. I think like the utility package this team has going on to try to outlast with hazards is good, and Urshifu is really nice with the new what is it called? Punching gloves, I think.
Punching gloves.
Yeah, I always want to call them boxing gloves, but punching gloves. And assuming you're able to hit your moves with Tornadus, I think this team would be very strong. It's just you are gonna lose games on whether or not you hit the Hurricane or what the new move is called. I can't remember off the top of my
And
head.
storm.
So that's the one. Uh, so it's like a fine team. It's got some cool defensive stuff. It's got some cool offensive stuff. It's just kind of sits right above what we'd put higher up on the tier list.
I think the biggest thing is that despite its good hazard stacking, its hazard removal is Glamora, and that's it. And Mortal Spin is arguably the easiest most blockable hazard removal because it's just a steel type switch in. Glamora can hit, but it's a very valuable Pokemon. You don't want to necessarily risk a lot of the time. So
Yeah, it's actually quite nice offensively. So if you don't always want to just have it be the remover. Sometimes you want it to go offensive as well.
so this team looks like it kind of has to run boot spam, which granted boot spam is very good, but it also limits your items.
Hmm. Do you have anything else to say, or should we just move on?
That cloak is not quite a dragon. Like it's technically a dragon, but it's not quite a
Yeah, I
dragon.
mean, it fits my rubric, so you steal some
I,
extra points from me, but at the end of the day,
um, think this team can do good things. I think this team has very high highs and it has pretty low lows. That's what I'd say.
for sure. All right, now we got the clever clef keys, which I have placed quite higher up than you do. So I'll start here. Uh, Things that I like about this team. You got some very cool options with Palafin and Landers being your first two picks. You got your very hard hitting offense on both physical and special side, right? You have all of your completed cores. You have the ground immunity, which is on my list. You have all your hazard game that I'd like to have you see there with rapid spin on both Kamala and Colossal. The only thing that really is holding this team back from being higher on my personal ranking is that just well, it has like some cohesion. It doesn't seem to have quite as much of a game plan as some of the other teams. Um, it's another team that I feel like where if you lose the momentum, you're going to struggle because your only solid defensive backbone is going to be Screamtail and kind of Slitherwing. So if you're going to be running like Slitherwing like you would be like a Buzzwole, right? Then you can kind of use it that way, but even then it's not really Buzzwole. And Screamtail isn't always going to be great to have as your pure defensive option. So if this team starts dropping in a trade war, it might come up short.
Yeah, I think that I really like this power. It's not quite hyper offense, but it's definitely bulky offense. Like, you don't have that much to take hits. You have Kamala, Screamtail, and Wing. I think the big holes in the defenses are there's a rock weakness, and you aren't great versus fairies. Room has to do double duty there, and it's not exactly a bulky steel type. That's more of a sweeper.
If it was
So
more of a bulky mon there in that slot, I think I'd like this team a lot more. Um,
other thing is that you don't have that much special power. You have Landorus, which granted is the best special breaker in the game. It's one Pokemon. So if you have a bad matchup, if one of your opponent's special walls has a good matchup versus Landorus, which albeit is rare, you're gonna have a hard time breaking that. But otherwise, I think it just works. It's just solid.
yeah, it's just solid, right? That's kind of a theme that we have a lot going forward here, right? There's a lot of solid teams, and it really just comes down to what we like in the rubric at the end of the day. between us. It's going to be a lot of this kind of sort of subjective stuff.
All right.
A lot of these teams are just good overall, and especially on my rubric that's like 1 to 10, a lot of these teams are falling in like 0.25 differences of each other.
I guess one thing, I'm not sure if this is something you were aware of, but Oricorio's Revelation Dance is always the user's primary type, which means if you terrestrialize, it becomes that Terra type. So Oricorio is basically the only Pokemon that gets Terra Blast in this.
Hmm. All right,
Is,
anything else, or do we just want to move it forward?
yeah, I mean, move forward.
All right, and we got Gorky's team, which is probably the team that we agreed on the most here, right?
Yeah, one spot difference. Just
Now, technically, I've put this higher, so normally I'd start, but do you mind starting on this one as I get a quick sip of water?
of course. So with this team, I really just like the defensive and offensive synergy. You don't really have any holes in the defense, and your offense works together. You have, of course, Iron Bundle, infamously. It can also flip turn out of its bad matchups into Annihilate, Iron Shreds, and Thunderous. So I feel like they all kind of just cover each other. Have really good rock setters. Pretty much any of Annihilate, Iron Shreds, Garganackle, and Bisharp will guarantee rocks are up. And you only have one hazard remover, but it's Iron Shreds, which is one of the top two hazard removers in the game. So I really like that. I guess the only thing I'd put down is that you only have rocks for hazards, so you can't really hazard stack as much as you might like on this sort of momentumish team. And also, there's kind of just weird speed tiers, I'd say, especially the Annihilate to Florges and then Bisharp to Garganackle. You have like a big drop off, so a lot of people can run Adamant Modest Natures against you.
Yeah, and like, even if your opponent was being conservative in speed tiering, just in case Floor just had speed, which it probably won't most of the time, then still the drop off from 70 to 35 is absolutely massive, right? It's probably the thing that sticks out to me the most about this team. But like otherwise, you have a lot of like good options. Floor just wishing into Garganackle or Bisharp or Nihilape, Iron Treads, etc. are all good options. Leech Seed from Appleton also kind of works in that scenario. You have like a lot of good stuff just kind of across the board, and you have good mons to win too. Iron Bundle's good, Nihilape's good. It's just kind of middling. It just kind of this team is just good. It's not necessarily great.
I think something to note definitely is you have a bit of a water weakness. Appleton kind of gets sniped by Ice Beam despite the thick fat, and Iron Bundle is not exactly water switch in. So you're gonna have to watch out for strong water attackers, especially if they're not choiced. But I will say I feel like Bisharp can do a lot here because it's basically Baby King Gambit, and we all know how good King Gambit is in OU with terrestrialization. So I feel like you can definitely customize the Eviolite Bisharp into what you need it to be.
Bisharp was a fine Pokemon even before Eviolite. So,
Yeah.
in fact, I think Eviolite might be one of its weaker sets still. I think Bisharp is just fine running what I like to do before. So, depending on what you're going to do with it, it'll get the job done.
Overall, team, I mean, like we're at ninth already. We're about to hit the first half, so we're gonna have less negative things and more positive things to say.
Until we hit the top, I feel like how I generally happen with these good videos is we start getting very nitpicky on the top teams.
Oh my gosh, we get so nitpicky.
All right, so we got the Tennessee Tyrants here now, and you have them at 8th, and I have them at 10th, so I'll have you start.
So, first things first. Golden Glow plus Hydreigon together, just every single type in the game, and it's just kind of an obnoxious special attacking core together. They both get nasty plot. They cover different speed tiers, and they just kind of work really well. I think and then of course you complete that fire Dragon Steel core with Amorous, who's like one of the few top tier fairies, and then you just have a solid lower point Fire Water Grass core. Just kind of have those cores on lock. I think you are a little limited in terms of hazard removal and not stealth and non-stealth rock hazard setting, but it's a solid team.
I think your speed also is a little bit held back. Um, Salazzle's not an always bring type of Pokemon, right? And that is your higher end speed. And 117 is a bit awkward because there's a lot of good Pokemon that start hitting 118 specifically in this meta. So it's not necessarily the highest. You don't Masquerain kind of helps in that sense with sticky webs, but not always going to be a webs matchup. It's got some holes in it. I wish you had some better wish targets for Vaporeon, and Vaporeon has some issues in and of itself, losing access to Flip Turn and stuff like that. It's got good options, and Goldengo Hydreigon's a really solid core, and I'm very interested to see how Namorous does. I just wish this team supported Iron Thorns more, especially as your Terra captain.
Yeah, I would say
No
one
ground
big
type
thing,
on this team, right?
no ground type on this team, so you'd either have to terrestrialize Iron Thorns into a ground type, which is not a bad option, or you'd get Volt switched on every single time. I think that it's, this team doesn't really have that bulk problem, but it doesn't, as in type weaknesses, but it doesn't really have that many dedicated walls. You have Vaporeon, kind of Decidueye. Ferrograph does have Wish, but is mostly offense of a team. And I think that can work, but it is going to be a little more difficult, especially because you have only one hazard remover and you have no uh, no electric immunity. So again, someone can hazard stack and volt switch, U-turn, volt switch against you, and you can't really stop that.
Which feels weird because you're the Golden Go team. Normally, you'd want to be the one to set the spikes, and forcing Iron Thorns into the spikes stacking role, especially as your Terra captain, just feels a little bit off. I don't know. I feel like
Yeah,
this
I
team
will.
is fine. It's just a little awkward.
Yeah, I think you could like make maybe one or two transactions, and it'd already be amazing.
I don't have anything else. Do we want to move on to the next team?
Right.
Uh,
Next, we have
the
oh,
Sun Curtains, right?
next we have the Iowa Farm Sun Currents. First thing that stood out to me are those really, really good defensive synergies. I don't see a single type weakness here. All of your defensive Pokemon cover each other in a way. Even like though you have two fire types, they don't even share weaknesses. So I really like the Fire Water Grass core in specifically, and I really like the Dragon Steel core.
Yeah, and my big note on this team when I was looking at it was that your end game options are all a little bit fragile. Specifically, you're looking to end game with either Belly Drum Azu or getting a Victory Dance off with Lilligant once or twice, or just letting everything die with King Gambit. Um, and that feels just a little awkward to me. I wish there was some bigger, more flashy threat in a way. Uh, Something like, the very obvious ones like Dragapult or Landorus or Palafin, something along those lines, because otherwise your like good end game sweepy options are like Crocodile and Heatran, both if they're scarfed. Just feels a little bit pigeonholed to me. Like you're going to have to go what? Azelf has a new boosting move, right? Um,
Yeah.
Mystical Power, I think is the name of it.
Yes.
It all feels like a B tier end game option.
Yes, I feel like your main thing is to stack hazards because you do have really good hazard setting, and both Gastrodon and Dragalge are great other hazard options. I think you just want to pivot around. The issue is you don't really have that many pivots. It's just Azelf, Rotom, Staraptor. So
Yeah, and your
that
removal is a bit shaky if your opponent's outpacing you. It's Lilligant, is it? With Defog.
would
And you don't really want to be, I feel like, dedicating a move to Defog on Lilligant.
you don't, especially if since it's one of your few sweepers. I do think the end game here is just playing it hazards and just playing it safe. In that kind of playing it safe way, you don't really have those big options like Coltrans.
Yeah, and like I said, if you are trying to go for like a Scarf Heatran Eruption type deal, then like you're not running boots, and if they have rocks and some spikes up, it's going to be lowering the power there. It's going to also make the belly drumming as Azuke a little bit awkward. It's on the cusp of being a good sweeping end game team, I feel like, but it's just not quite there.
I can't find anything legitimately really bad about the team, any big weaknesses. It just doesn't have those big strengths that I think the next six teams have.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. 100%. Speaking of those next six teams, we
Oh boy,
got
this
the biggest, I think, disparage between our ranks here.
is either this or West. This one is a very big difference, though.
Yes.
Um,
You have a number two, so I'll let you sing his praises, and then I'll kind
team
of come in and just
team is
destroy his dreams.
actually amazing, in my opinion. Just you have really good speed tiers. You have really good momentum and hazard setting. Love the Meowscarada Dragapult core, and you can just keep pivoting around that. I think you have great offense on both sides because you have a Slowking with Future Sight to work with Meowscarada. You have up in the form of Thundurus, Anaconda, Dragapult, Tinkaton, and the backbone. You don't have any hard defensive Pokemon other than Slowking, but none of them are passive enough for someone to fully just set up on them. So I just really like the utility you have here. And the big thing is that you have bad hazard control, and that's the only thing I think really holding you back.
Now, when I looked at this team, I'm like, wow, Dragapult, Masquerada, Slowking G. Incredible first three. I don't know how Slowking G got into the third round, but you managed to get it. Um, that being said, there's like a few minor gripes I have with it, quote unquote minor. I think your speed tier is a little bit weird, just dropping off at 70. You're kind of packed up right in that 70 to 100 range. And you have that big drop to 123. I wish there was something a little bit more in between there. Um, and then big one was the hazard removal. I believe the only option for hazard removal here is I'm forgetting which one has it now.
Or,
Uh,
or
yes, Cleavor, which is kind of awkward on Cleavor, and you kind of wanting to keep the hazards up in this matchup. It's a little awkward overall. And then day, it's not like the worst team around. You're missing like some points in like the ground immunity because I'm looking for two ground immunes and you only have one. Ground spam, I feel like could be like a really big problem for you considering it's just Thundurus. And I feel like Thundurus is one of those mons that just gets stone edged once and dies. And then your opponent can just spam EQ into you, and your only other resist is Meowscarada, which doesn't really want to be doing that often. I always think that the Fairy Steel typing is very awkward. It's just as awkward on Tinkaton as it is on Mega Mawile, in my opinion. Don't necessarily want to be tanking a million hits with Tinkaton. It's just stats just doesn't have that backing behind it to be doing that too often. So just got like a couple like gripes that I have with the team. It's not necessarily bad. In fact, this is one of the teams that I looked at on like the paper itself. I was like, man, how is this team so low? I think I'd actually enjoy using this team. It's just it misses my rubric a little bit.
I think the ground and ghost spam will be the downfall of this team, but I also think that with bulky pivots and the offensive pressure you can set up, it really can keep momentum. Strong team.
Yeah, it's not bad at all. Like it's got power behind it. It's got bulk behind it. It's just got a few issues in my opinion. Uh,
Right.
Next up we got the Typhlosians, and this is actually another one of our gaps. Not as nearly big, but since I have rated this highly at number two, I'll start speaking what I like about the team. And there's two things I like about the team. One, the very obvious electric terrain, Halucha and Raichulola that you got going on between Surge Surfer and Unburden, as well as a slightly smaller thing with Slowking getting access to its switch move that sets up the Sinnoh, giving Baxcalibur access to not just always running Thermal Exchange. If you have a good matchup where they don't necessarily have a great fire type, and you can opt for Ice Body instead, which I think is a really cool option. You kind of got this like snow. I was about to say hail. It's not hail anymore. It's this snow electric terrain kind of backbone to this team that I think is very cool. Chiyu is debatably even better than Landorus as a special breaker to see how those two match up this season. Uh, and you just got a lot of cool options going through. I don't know if I'd necessarily count Halucha as a defogger, um, but it technically fills the role, so it hits a lot of my rubric very well. But I'm assuming you have some issues that you see in it, right?
Yeah, I will say he needs a fairy type. You do not have a great dragon resist. Earthworm has like no special defense, so you're kind of relegated to using Slowking. And I think the team is a bit slow. You have Raichu and Halucha for amazing speed and electric terrain, both of them. But after that, you're just kind of like dropping off, and someone with a fast sweeper can break. I also think the walls are a little bit passive. Slowking can switch out, and Hippowdon can whirlwind, but Earthworm, if you have enough HP to Shed Tail, you get to Shed Tail, but otherwise it kind of just sits. And I am I'm not really sure what.
There's a bit of a non-mo on this team between Slowking and Hippowdon, right? Where if you're using the switch move, what is it called? Chilling Joke or something like that?
Reception.
Chilling Reception.
Yeah,
Uh, and then Hippowdon comes in at some point, you're going to be switching the weather up again. So
yeah,
it's a bit of a awkward interaction you got going on there between your ground type and Slowking.
especially since those are two key defensive Pokemon. I will say though that the snow is really nice. You don't even need to run Ice Body on Baxcalibur because just the 1.5 defense boost is massive when you're setting up Dragon Dances on a Pokemon as bulky as Baxcalibur. Um, I do like your hazard setting. Glimmet does not get Mortal Spin, unfortunately, but you still have the free Toxic Spikes if you hit it that your opponent will need to watch out for. Orthworm has Spikes and Toxic Spikes. And Pincurchin, who you'll want to bring a fair amount since you have two sweepers that rely on electric terrain, has spikes and toxic spikes. So that's really nice. I like your removal. It's Sarina has always just been very consistent, and Halucha is a better defogger than I think a lot of people realize. I know definitely a bunch of people have started using it more in uh, regular ladder because you can defog on Golden Go with Mold Breaker. But I think it's just having a fast defogger and having a bulky spinner works as just solid hazard removal. Definitely on the better end here.
If there's something I could say about this team, is I don't know if Dunsparce does anything for you necessarily. And if you could somehow take the points from Dunsparce and Hippowdon and get some other ground that kind of fits a similar role, I think that would be a very cool way. But I don't know what out there would do that role. um, in this limited Pokemon pool. In an ideal world, there'd be something, but I don't think there's anything on the board right now. That's the only way
Yeah,
I could really see to improve this team. Otherwise, you're just going to start blasting through stuff with Chiyu.
yeah, exactly. I feel like Dunsparce ironically like fits a kind of important ghost resist role because dark and ghost resists are there, but they're not the strongest since you want Chiyu more as a breaker than something to be tanking shadow balls and knockoffs.
100%.
But overall, I think this is still a very solid team. And let's move on to the consensus once more.
Yeah, we have the Braviaries next, right? And I'll let you start here. Once again, you have the higher ranking here.
Right, so the Braviary, I just like the type synergy of this. You got your Fire Water Grass core, you got your Fairy Dragon Steel core. They just really work well together. You have a lot of solid options for setting hazards, and only one option for removal, but it is the best removal in the entire game. So I think just kind of have the team all around.
Yeah, and your first three options are very, like I said, Great Tusk is just kind of like the best setter and remover in the format. And with Greninja having access to Battle Bond, now not being Ash form, instead of just being an Omni boost, um, and you also have Volcarona with Quiver Dance, this team feels like it's trying to like grind you down to a point where you just end up making a mistake and giving that Greninja or that Volcarona that one turn it needs to kind of run away with the game.
Yeah, exactly. Because you just have like a lot of bulk. Back it up. Gudra Hisui, Amoonguss, Enamorous Therian, and even Great Tusk is an amazing defensive Pokemon that you can really just play it safe until you find the perfect opportunity to have one of your heavy hitters. And even like Mesprit could do that with its new mystical power. So
And I'm very interested to see how Gudra Hisui ends up stacking up here because this Mon it has like the Dialga typing, right? Uh,
I think
it's also Terra
Hisui.
Captain, great base stats. Very interested to see how it will turn up.
Interestingly enough, I'm not a huge fan of it as a Terra Captain just because its typing is one of the best things about it. I could be proven wrong, especially if you go like Terra Water plus Sap Sipper. That sounds like so annoying to deal with. Um, but I just think this team is solid. There's an awkward gap between Greninja and Volcarona, and I think that you have again, if there's somehow a way to hazard stack and block Great Tusk reliably, you might have some trouble since this is such a defensive, a bulky team. But otherwise, it's just a good team. Not much else to say.
Yeah, I don't feel like it really loses to anything super hard on paper, right? Nothing that just folds to. So just try to outlast your opponent, make them make that mistake that lets you run away with the game, and you should win.
Next, we got the moldy sandwiches.
Yes, and I actually quite like this team a lot. Uh, I made a joke when I was doing the live PR for the moldy sandwiches that we started off with Garchomp, Cinderace, Slowbro, and we were going back to Gen 8 OU, right? Back when Cinderace was legal with Libero, right? Uh,
Yeah.
it's got a lot of mons that I personally like, stuff like Fortress, etc. And it just got a lot of good stuff going on across the board. All your type cores are pretty much there. You got good hazard options. Um, your only remover is Rapid Spin, if I'm correct. There's no defog here.
Court change, which is a
Court change,
little.
that's right. Always overlook the court change. I did give it a full uh, point rating for court change on Cinderace, because I feel like a lot of the time you might, even though you have good setting options, you might not necessarily bring them every matchup. So just got a lot of good points on my rubric. I would like to see something go above 120, but 119 is so close to 120 on Cinderace that I didn't mind it. Speed tiers look good pretty much across the board. I just don't really have any complaints about this team.
I mean, I really like this team. I helped build it, but I think Cinderace right now is definitely the best Protean user because you can delay your Protean by using Pyro Ball first, and then you get to activate it.
Hmm.
While Greninja and Meowscarada have to transform into a type since they're dual type. I think Garchomp is just like the ultimate versatile offensive Pokemon, and that you have a lot of Pokemon to support Garchomp with it.
I
I
guess
think
if
the
I was looking for a problem, the special offense on the team is a little bit awkward, right?
special offense is not great. You have Nasty Plot and Rotom Mow. That's kind of it. Quiver Dance Venomoth is not to be underestimated, especially when you have it as a Terra Captain. But you can't really break, especially if something has a way to beat Rotom and Venomoth.
And Deancey can kind of go offensive. I know it gets Calm Mind. But it's most useful on the defensive, especially with its low speed. It's a cool team overall. I think you got some good options. There's not necessarily anything too bad. If I was nitpicking, your rock resists are a bit shaky.
The Rock and the Flying Resist are not the greatest because you have DNC and you have Garchomp. Garchomp wants to do a lot of other things than switch into Rock moves. And Deancey can resist flying pretty easily, but it doesn't have reliable recovery, and a lot of flying types get Steel Wing, which is a really funny tech specifically for this team.
Hmm.
I think the removal isn't best because even if you do have court change, your opponent can just set hazards again and you're back to neutral. And Fortress is semi reliable.
It's not the worst. There's definitely teams out there with worse hazard removal options. It's just not quite that upper echelon to get into the number two or number one slot, right? It's just very solid overall with good
Yeah, it's
options
so.
across the board.
And I gotta say, 10 out of 10 for creativity. Like, of course, the first three kind of look like a Sword and Shield OU team, but you have Venomoth, Overquill, Boros, and I feel like we don't see a lot of these Pokemon, and they aren't just like funny picks. I feel like a lot of these can put in some work.
100%. I think the only like true funny pick here is maybe Bayonet, but even now it's got SD, right? So, you know, it's got some stuff going for it. And then we have the Hearth. I wanted to say Hearthstone. Oh my gosh, Blizzard's getting into my brain. The Hearth Home City Heracross, which you have rated at number one here for your personal
Yes,
ranking.
I think this is this is genuinely my favorite team. I could not think of a single thing that's bad about this team other than maybe it's um maybe its speed control could be better, but have solid hazard setters. You have two great hazard removers in Donphan and Tatsugiri. You have more, a little bit low on the momentum, but still enough. You have U-turn on Sneasler and Iron Jugular, Volt Switch on Toxtricity, and Baton Pass on Tatsu and Wigglytuff. You have no weaknesses I can think of, and you still have knockoff, which is very, very. You have knockoff on both Iron Jugulus and Don Fan. You just kind of cover everything, and it's hard to say anything bad about this team. Go
Yeah,
ahead, Close.
Sneasler is such a BS mon with its signature move. Uh, Base 120 speed, fantastic 130 attack. It's almost a perfect offensive attacker. I think the only thing that I find just a bit awkward on this team is it just looks weird to me. Um, and that's really it. My only tangible is there's something that just doesn't sit quite right about this team. It feels like there's some sort of hole in my gut instinct that's telling me this team isn't going to be quite up to snuff. I'm not sure what that is. At first, we thought it was potentially momentum, but then baton pass was still good. It's got good defensive utility across the board. The type chart looks fantastic. I don't know. It's just something about it just doesn't quite sit right with me. This is the first team where I haven't been able to pick in like the last few seasons exactly what that is.
Yeah, I still think that's amazing, especially just offensive core of Sneasler, Iron Jugulus. I especially love that you can U-turn and poison your opponent as you switch out. That's awful. But,
Hmm.
I think I was like surprised that this is was drafted by a beginner coach. I really like this team a lot.
Yeah, and me saying that, like there's something off about it, put I still put this down at fourth here. It's a fantastic looking team on paper and in theory. I think this team will absolutely smash uh, through its competition, and I don't know, not a whole
I
lot
think you
bad
just
to say
gotta
about it.
think it might be a tiny bit more difficult to pilot, but it's just a strong team. So play it well, and I think you have a really good shot of winning.
And then we'll go to our top pick here,
Number one,
the Cherry Grove Chicoreas, which was my top pick.
and
Um,
I have it
go ahead.
I said, and I have it at third, so it just barely beat our home city Heracross when we split the difference.
Yeah. Um, I'll start off with the only thing that I find really kind of awkward about this team. Uh, is that I think Gyarados is a bit of an awkward pick. You're kind of going for Torkoal probably every game, and Gyarados doesn't really have access to good flying stabs, so it's water stabs going to be neutered. Um, you got cool options with the Sun, specifically with Roaring Moon, and you just got a lot of good stuff going on in general. You hit everything in my type chart well on my rubric, all the cores, etc. It's just the only thing that I took points away for was specifically the Gyarados kind of awkwardness. I'd like to see some sort of like more heavy investment in the Sun, but it's not like there's any other part of the team that's necessarily not functioning right. You got two removers, you have the four setters, which I was looking for. It's only Stealth Rock, but I feel like the team can function perfectly fine without spikes. I like it a lot.
Yeah, this team is still really good. Of course, you have the Dash Bun, which you can use as to beat opposing fire type attacks. Have Terra Uxie, which if you make like Terra Fire, Terra Steel, Terra Poison with Levitate, is going to be really difficult to kill. And you just kind of have a good mix of just physical attackers, special attackers, bulk that's hard to pivot around. I think my biggest issues aren't really even issues, they're just missed opportunities. I would have liked to see another fire type that can really take advantage of sun and or a chlorophyll abuser.
Something like
And
Scovillain, right?
Esco villain or like even just like armor rouge or I don't know what's left, but something that can take advantage of the sun other than Roaring Moon. Because I feel like another thing is that Torkoal holds up a bit of the defensive backbone of this team, which isn't a bad thing. It's one of your two removers and it's one of your main fairy resists. But since you're going to be bringing so much, I feel like you could take better advantage of the sun. Then the other big thing is that I feel like Doug Trio is filling two very important roles here as your steel type and your ground type, and it has no defense to fill that. So that's the only thing I'm really nitpicking here. This is a great team.
Yeah, because like realistically, you're probably going to be bringing Torkoal, Roaring Moon, Ixie every game. Like your opponent's going to be able to prepare for that core every single time, and then you're probably bringing Lucario still every game as well. So really, four of your mons are kind of slotted in already. It'll be a little bit easier to prepare for, but it really is going to depend if Roaring Moon can kind of punch you through as you need it to, right?
Yeah, and that's also why I want to see like another Sun abuser because you can have someone where you know exactly what their team is going to bring, but if you just don't have a counter to that, especially when they stack on, then you're kind of golden. And I'd like to see that. But otherwise, really good team. Earned the number one.
Yeah, just good stuff all around. Very nitpicky here. I'm very interested to see how you work with the Hisuian Zoroark. I hope we see some fire plays out of that, pun intended. So, otherwise, I think that's the end of everything, right?
Yeah, it is. This was a really fun thing to do. I think this is overall like a really solid draft, and I can't wait to see how the battles.
Yeah, and once again, just to reiterate at the end here, that it's going to be more so about how you use your teams than wherever we place them on these leaderboards, right? You never ever see a power ranking just come completely out one for one in playoffs, right? So if you guys take your team, don't you see it at like 12th, 14th, or even at first, I wouldn't get too cocky, right? Uh, Try to keep in mind you will still have to play it well. So our word isn't the be all end all, and I hope you guys all have a good luck in the regular season.
Right. Thanks. I've been Troubles, and
I've been Coltrane's. Catch you guys around.